to talk about a couple of things. One, trends globally with respect to shared services, and I'll define some terms and trends specifically in Latin America. Before I do that, let me tell you a little bit about Deloitte, just so you understand kind of what the experience base is that we're using. So, Deloitte, big global professional services firm, audit, tax, consulting. We do a lot in the GBS space. So we deal with clients that are thinking about outsourcing, thinking about shared services under the global services umbrella. We work with a lot of top-tier clients, a lot of different accolades from various organizations, Forrester, Gartner, IAOP. But the important thing is the clients that we work with. I'm based in San Francisco. I've been with Deloitte 13 years. I've been in San Francisco the entire time. So the clients that I've worked with around these strategies, HP, Cisco, Salesforce, high growth companies, Facebook, Google, and global companies as well, and companies in Latin America. So it's an experience space that provides a lot of good perspective. Also, just the other point to highlight around kind of the breadth that Deloitte brings to these strategies, we have functional depth. And the reason that's important is because as companies are thinking about developing their strategies, you need to understand, what is it they want to do, but how does that tie to the functions and the services that they're thinking about providing? And so we're able to leverage that, and we're able to bring that to bear to our clients. So you can see across a variety of different areas what the functional breadth and depth is that we have. So let's kind of get into some of the specifics here. All right, shared services. So I'm going to use a couple of different terms. They mean different things, but they all sort of hover around the same thing. Shared services, captive, centers of excellence. They all mean basically an operation that is owned by the organization, delivered in some place. Could be in the same country as the headquarters, could be in a different low-cost market, but it's owned by the organization, which is different than an outsourced delivery model. Does that make sense? Are we all sort of baselined on the same definition? So what I'm going to share with you are first our shared services global trends, and then I'll talk about some of the specific trends in Latin America. So every other year, every odd year, we do a global shared services survey, has over 300 global representatives across different organizations. We've been doing it since 1999. It gives us a rich data set for what companies are doing specifically with their captive, specifically with their shared service organizations. As you can see, covers a variety of industries, a variety of different organization sizes, organizations that are less than $1 billion, organizations that are greater than $1 billion, greater than $10 billion, $25 billion organizations, big companies. Same thing, organizations that have employees less than 1,000 FTEs and greater than 100,000 FTEs. So it's a wide data set of organizations that respond to our survey. They come from a variety of places as well, 35 countries across the globe. About 50 or so of the respondents were specifically from Latin America. They have shared services centers located specifically in Latin America as well. And the size of their shared service organizations also vary. Shared service organizations that are less than 100 FTEs, less than 100 employees across different functions, greater than 500 employees. So we asked a variety of questions. What I'm going to share with you is just an excerpt. I think maybe 10% of the survey. If you're actually interested in the full survey, we could work through Kirk to make it available, distribute it to the attendees. This question asks, where do they have shared service centers located? So where do they have their own internal operations? Not where have they outsourced, but where do they have their own current internal operations to deliver back office functions or front office functions? It could be sales and marketing, it could be sales ops, sales support, finance, HR, IT, procurement, back office as well. As you can see, the ones in green are organizations that have the highest, or countries that have the highest concentration of shared service operations. The ones in light green, less, yellow, and blue, even less. As you can see, the countries that are listed in green are countries where there is the most concentration of shared service operations globally, based on our representative set of over 300 organizations. As you can imagine, the US has a lot of shared service operations. Brazil, because of the size of the market, I'll talk about the specifics around the Brazilian market that almost mandates that companies have to have a shared service operation in Brazil. And I'll talk about that. And India. India, obviously, because it relies a lot on the US market, a lot of English-based processes. What we're seeing is that there's also a heavy concentration and increasing. Over the years, we've been seeing growth in Latin America for shared services. So I'll talk about some of those trends. So then we asked another question, what is driving the demand for shared services, and what is the reason for setting up a shared service center? I have listed here on the left-hand side of the page organizations, the reasons why setting up primary reasons for setting up a shared service center, and if you're going to select a location. So I'll cover both those. So why, what drives a shared service center? Cost, the economics. You have to have a business case. It's very few organizations that say, I at least have to have a cost-neutral business case if it's not cost advantageous, if I'm not saving money. But no one will say, I don't care about cost. You have to have the business case. A lot of organizations are also using shared services as a platform for growth and to scale. It's actually something we're seeing a lot in the Bay Area with high growth companies. I've worked with Facebook, I've worked with Salesforce, DocuSign. They're all organizations that are expanding heavy growth, and so they want to build a scalable platform that'll help them adjust and grow into new markets. So it's whether they're going to go through acquisition and they want to have a consistent standardized platform that they can integrate into, or they're going to use it as a base to grow, they need that scalability, and shared services gives them that. Improving service levels, access to language, quality control. Control is an interesting piece. There's an organization that I'm working with right now that had used a tier 1 outsourcing service provider. They ran into fraudulent issues. The chief accounting officer is about to get fired, and they're setting up a shared service center as a control layer on top of the outsourcer to drive more control and more rigor into the organization. So those are considerations. So it's cost, scalability, access to skills, service levels. Similar considerations when they're thinking about selecting a shared service center. So when they're thinking about setting up a shared service center, where do they want to do it? Location, proximity to either current operations or proximity to their HQ, their headquarters. And this is particularly relevant for Latin American companies. I'll talk about this a little bit. But Latin American companies tend to set up their shared service centers primarily in the same country that they have their headquarter operations. And there's reasons for that, and I'll explain that. Access to labor, the labor availability, the labor quality, the risk profile of the country. So those are all considerations that a company will use when they're thinking about setting up a shared service center. Any of these surprising?
So are these shared services locations servicing headquarters in the U.S., or are they servicing the local area that they're?
Both and everything. So I'll just talk about it a little bit now. So for a multinational organization, a U.S.-based company, they'll usually have a global delivery model where they have India supporting the U.S. because of language. They'll have something in Eastern Europe supporting the Western European market because of time zone, because of language, because of familiarity with regulatory rules. And then they may set up something in Latin America to serve either the Latin American market, or if they've chosen not to do something in India, they'll use Latin America to support the U.S. Latin American companies are primarily based, and most of their operations, the term multi-Latinas, if you guys are familiar with that term, multi-Latinas have almost all of their operations in Latin America. They're growing in prominence regionally and globally, but they're primarily servicing the local region and servicing the rest of their markets from Latin America. So multinationals will use markets as part of a delivery model. And what I have found is that multi-Latinas tend to focus their shared service centers in Latin America to serve the local markets, the regional markets, and globally. Is that consistent with everyone else's experience, what you guys are seeing in the market? So when we talk about the scope and the services that go into shared services, you'll see the listing of processes. This is a little bit different than outsourcing. If I was to show you a chart with outsourcing, IT would be the first one on the list. But for shared services, finance is usually the first function or the biggest function that exists in shared service centers, followed by HR, followed by IT, followed by tax, followed by procurement. Most organizations are setting up multi-function shared service centers. They're not setting up just an IT shared service center or just a finance center of excellence or just a procurement center of excellence. They're setting up multi-function service centers, and then that's driving the conversation around global business services. Are you guys familiar with that term, what global business services means, sort of that trend in the market? It's basically the idea of trying to integrate your services cross-functionally, trying to drive more synergy across your functions, asking the question whether finance needs to report to the CFO, whether IT needs to report to the CIO or the CTO, or whether you can have a service structure on top of that and have a chief shared services officer and have reporting lines across functions. So that's a trend that's happening in the market, and it's because companies are having multi-function shared service centers that's driving that. So there's a lot of data here. I'm not going to cover everything, but what I wanted to talk about was foreign direct investment, sort of inbound foreign direct investment, inbound FDI. So where are organizations investing in Latin America with respect to shared services? This primarily applies to multinationals because as I've mentioned once or twice, and I'll get into it a little bit more, multi-Latinas tend to have their shared service centers primarily in the country where they're headquartered. So they're not investing in other countries for shared services. This is specific to shared services. Setting up shared service centers, creating shared service jobs, shared services capital. Over the last 10 years, the countries that have had the most inbound FDI for shared services work, Costa Rica, Colombia, Mexico, Brazil, and Argentina. Costa Rica, as I'm sure most of you are familiar with, very mature, very well-established market, has been on the map for shared services and outsourcing for a long time. Organizations are still actively involved investing in Costa Rica for big-scale shared services. Walmart, Pfizer, over the last couple of years have set up big operations in Costa Rica for finance and accounting, BPO-type shared service centers. Colombia is a country that 10 years ago wasn't really on the radar for shared services. Concerns around security, safety, lack of familiarity from US markets. Increasingly, it's getting on the short list. If someone is thinking about setting up a shared service center in Latin America, Colombia is usually on the short list to explore further. Mexico, a mature, established market, close proximity to the US, good talent, favorable economics, makes sense. There's a lot of companies that have large captive shared service centers throughout Mexico. HP is an organization that I work with a lot. They have a very large service center in Guadalajara doing finance and accounting, IT, procurement, supply chain. Those examples exist. Brazil, primarily to serve the Brazilian market. Argentina, 10 years ago, was very popular for shared service centers. Has a lot of capability, obviously because of some of the economic challenges that it's faced the last couple of years. That popularity has dissipated, has decreased, but it's still the country that has capabilities and has received investment over the last 10 years. There's other places that are emerging, Guatemala, Uruguay, other places that are getting more and more investment and becoming more popular for different types of shared service captive operations. Any surprises on this chart? So what is it that people are putting in their shared service centers in Latin America? The trends here are very consistent with global trends. When you talk about companies, and this is coming directly from our survey, but when you're talking about what functions or what processes are organizations putting in their shared service centers in Latin America, the list is almost the same as the global list. Finance is the first function. Again, if I was to show you an outsourcing chart, IT would be first. But for shared service centers, finance is first. HR, IT, tax, procurement are sort of the top 5. The same trend around single versus multifunction. About 60% of the shared service centers in Latin America are multifunction, not just a single function. There's also an equal amount of increase around knowledge-based and transaction-based processes. So again, consistent with the global trends. The other thing that's happening in Latin America is shared service centers in Latin America are expected to continue increasing the scope of the BUs, the business units that they're supporting, and the geos and the countries and the regions that they're supporting. So there's expectation from companies that have Latin America shared service centers that their service centers are going to provide more and more services to more customers, to more markets. So then then the question is, when somebody is thinking about doing a shared service center, what are the different considerations? How do I evaluate different companies or different countries? I'm not going to get into specifics of how you prioritize and what is specific, what are the highest priority items for each company. It varies. Companies will be concerned about cost. They'll be concerned about safety and stability in the economy, in the market that they're going to move to, concerned about the labor availability, the talent, the risk profile, how close it is to their current operations. But the way to read this chart, on the x-axis, on the bottom axis, you have shared service concentration for Latin American countries. So do they have shared services centers currently? What's the scale of them? How many jobs? How many companies are in there? And on the y-axis, you have the cost. So obviously, a place like Brazil, as we've mentioned, has a lot of capability because it's serving the internal market, but it's very costly. US and Canada, a lot of capability, a lot of talent, a lot of existing shared service centers, but it's also very costly. Then you have sort of a grouping of countries sort of that fall in the mid-tier that have different characteristics and different profiles. Costa Rica and Mexico, countries that we've talked about, established capabilities, good language skills, good availability of talent, close to the US market, favorable economics, things that are a lot of presence in country around shared service centers, things that are driving that concentration. Then you get into places like Chile and Uruguay, which are places that if you're in the US, you tend not to think about as much. Why? They just tend to not emerge to the top of the list. Part of it is distance, part of it is just the geography. It's further south, so it takes a while to get there. And so if you're in California and you're going to set up a shared service center in Latin America, if you're the client thinking about that, do I want to fly and take a 4-hour flight to Mexico or somewhere in Central America like Guatemala? Or do I want to get on a potentially like a 10-hour flight and spend a lot of time traveling all the way to Chile? Those are things that clients think about. And so when they're setting up, same thing with Uruguay, a lot of talent, pretty affordable. BASF set up a pretty large service center, and they were willing to manage that long distance and that sort of that distance. But other organizations are less comfortable with that, and they want something that they can get to in the same day.